Hi, everybody. This is Lisa Haven, and today I've got 3 government documents that are critical and may harbor some imperative information about America's future. 2 of these in particular talk about our future enslavement. I'm talking civilian domestic labor camp programs in which you and I will be required to work for free. Yes, that's your typical slave labor. And 2, not 1, but 2. One's an executive order. The other is the actual breakdown of it called the Civilian Labor Camp Document. Another thing that I want to touch on as well is Operation Garden Plot. You may have heard of it. And if you haven't, I want to take you to the actual source and show you that this operation basically takes control of our local and states governments in the event of peace or wartime and basically puts the feds in charge. Let's dive into those. All right, so here we are on the first one, Operation Garden Plot. I wanted to start here, but as you can see, this has been unclassified and it's through the Department of the Army and it's their civil disturbance plan. Now, I'm going to read to you the Wikipedia definition of this particular document. Operation Garden Plot is a general U.S. Army and National Guard plan to respond to major domestic civil disturbances within the United States. The plan was developed in response to the civil disorders of the 1960s, and it is now under the control of U.S. Northern Command, or NORTHCOM. It provides federal military and law enforcement assistance to local governments during times of major civil disturbances. Now, that is the technical Wikipedia definition, but in short, basically what this does is it is a takeover of our state and local governments and basically puts the feds in charge. And like I said, this can be in the event of any kind of civil disturbance they deem necessary. And even according to some executive orders that I'm going to show you, this can be done in peacetime or times of war. All we need is a stroke of the president's pen and we are good to go. Now, in this particular document, it has a few critical points that I want to show you, but let me just state this first. It was originated in 1968, and it has been updated a few times over the years, and I believe, I'm not 100%, but the most recent is in 1991, and it has also been activated before. The LA riots is one example of that. Now, moving on, I want to take you down to scroll page, I think, that'd probably be the best way to put it. Scroll page 35. So give me a sec while I get there. Here we are. And I found this particular information interesting and I want to share it. All right, here we are. This is scroll page 35 and their page B-1 in case you need that. But basically this section, the reason why I want to show it to you, because I think some of this is where we are today, but these are reasons basically that they would enact Operation Garden Plot. And here it is. Civil disturbances which are beyond the control of municipal or state authorities may occur at any time. Dissatisfaction with the environmental conditions contributing to racial unrest and civil disturbances, and dissatisfaction with national policy as manifested in the anti-draft and anti-Vietnam demonstrations are recognized factors within the political and social structure. As such, they might provide a preconditioned base for a steadily deteriorating situation leading to demonstrations and violent acts upon the social order. The consistency and intensity of these preconditions could lead in time to a situation of insurgency should external subversive forces develop successful control of the situation. Federal military intervention may be required to preserve life and property and maintain normal processes of government. Let's just pause right there. So in other words, they can enact Operation Garden Plot, which is a federal takeover of our local and state governments, and so much more than that. I mean, we're talking martial law, feds in the streets, and the whole 9 yards. And this could be by city, or it could be, by state, could be nationwide. We don't know. I mean, it depends on the scenario that they basically enact this bad boy. But listed reasons are basically your racial riots, your civil unrest and riots. We're already seeing that. They're trying to push up tensions with racial conflict right now. With Dylan Roof, the Charleston church shooter. He wanted to start a race riot. Obviously, part of agenda, false flag or not, is still up in the air. But definitely, they are using this as agenda to start a race riot. Why? So they can implement or put in that military where they want, or that control where they want, so we can get used to and pacified by military on our streets. It's part of the agenda. It's part of the end game. That's one reason. Also, any civil disturbances is another. And then they go on to say that another disturbance could be dissatisfaction with national policy. In other words, they're saying riots and stuff could start because you and I are unhappy with some kind of law that got passed. Well, let me say something. There's a lot of laws right now that I think we should be up in arms about already. But that's another reason. Basically, your political dissidents, your patriots, your veterans, those that are not going to go along with every ploy of the government, such as your Christians and constitutionalists. Those are the ones that are basically on the main target, at least now, against what they're trying to do. Some other things here that I thought was interesting is on the following page. Let me go there. Here is on this annex. Well, let me read this first. It says, urban areas. In assessing the probabilities of civil disturbances occurring in urban areas, the following should be considered. In other words, when they go to assess the situation, these are the things that need to be considered while doing it. Population by race, population of the core city of the urban area, percentage and distribution of minorities in the population, presence of large blue-collar neighborhoods, as reflected by industrial payrolls and industrial concentrations, presence of poor economic and sociological conditions and their reflections in crime rates, unemployment rate in the area and sections of concentrated unemployment, presence and degree of activity of militant, racial, left-wing, anti-war, anti-draft, and extreme right-wing groups. Notice that they don't say extreme left-wing, it's just extreme right-wing. You know, something to ponder. An assessment of the capabilities of these groups to provoke disturbances, history of civil disturbances in the area, assessment of known and probable demonstrations, existence of widespread sense of injustice and real or imagined lack of means of redress, caching of arms or explosives, other preparations for disturbances. So there is some things that they're going to be keeping an eye out for whenever they start to implement this federalized Operation Garden Plot. Now it goes on to say just a little bit further down here on the following page, page 37, that here are some indicators of potential violence. So if you have these indicators, you have that potential. High unemployment rate among minority groups, increased crime rates among minority groups, protest arising from income disparities between minority and majority groups, declining rapport between local officials and minority groups, migrations of large number of minority groups, protests by minority groups to such conditions as slum conditions, segregation in housing and schools, lack of job, lack of recreational facilities, police brutality, and local overpricing practices. So that's kind of the list there, but it's indicators of potential violence, and those are some of the things, and that's kind of really expanded over the years. But I will leave this document for you to check out. I haven't read through the entire thing, but I'm definitely going to soon. So there's that. Moving on. Now here we are at whitehouse.gov. This is the second one. Executive Order National Defense Resource Preparedness, or Executive Order number 13603. Now this back in 2011 gave President Obama not only the power to control all of our resources, but also the power to enact slave labor at the stroke of his pen. And I'm talking you and I, or whomever they deem necessary, to work for free. Now, the reason that I wanted to show you Operation Garden Plot first is because I think that document opens the door for this. First, we have our state and local governments taken over by a federalized government, which is possible in the event of anything that they deem necessary. And then once that takes place, and we already know our FEMA camps are real. We know that through internment and resettlement documents, not to mention all the FEMA camp video footage that is out there, but they can use the feds or even foreigners, there's lots of different theories on that, to round up dissidents like you and I to be used for slave labor. Lots of theories on that, but this is definitely one. Now, the first section that I want to show you is section 201 right here, where it says priority and allocations. This is where it gives the president or the president's, those who he authorizes, to basically take over all our resources. It says the authority of president conferred by section yada yada to require acceptance and priority performance of contracts or orders other than contracts of employment to promote the national defense over performance of any other contracts or orders, and to allocate materials, services, and facilities as deemed necessary or appropriate to promote national defense is delegated to the following agency heads. Now, it says in order to promote national defense, but it also says earlier, let me show you this, flip back up in section 102, that this is definitely for peacetime as well as national emergency. So here we have it in the use of peacetime and times of national emergency. And this is stated a few times throughout the document as well, as you can see there. So back to 201, I just wanted to make that statement. Here are the things that they can take over. Agriculture, that's our food, our livestock, veterinary resources, plant, domestic distribution of farm equipment. The Secretary of Energy can take over the energy. Secretary of Health and Human Services with respect to health and human services. Transportation, Secretary of Defense would have our water resources, and the Secretary of Commerce would be materials, services, and facility, including construction materials. The Secretary of each agency delegated authority under subsection A of this section, resource departments, shall plan for and issue regulations to prioritize and allocate resources and establish standards and procedures by which the authority shall be used to promote the national defense under both emergency and non-emergency conditions. Each secretary shall authorize the heads of other agencies as appropriate to place priority ratings on contracts and orders for materials, services, and facilities needed in support of programs approved under Section 202 of this order. Now let's scroll. That is basically giving them permission to take over our resources. Now here in section 502, it talks very clearly about how you and I can be used as basically slave labor. It says consultants, the head of each agency, the agencies we talked about, otherwise delegated functions under this order is delegated the authority of the president under section 710B and C of the Act 50 USC application 2160 BC to employ persons of outstanding experience, okay, to employ us, and ability without compensation, and to employ experts, consultants, or organizations. The authority delegated by this section may not be redelegated. So it makes it clear that they want to employ persons of outstanding experience and abilities, but they want to do it without paying, without compensation, very clearly. Then it gets into a little bit more of the labor requirements and what they require. I'm not going to read this, but it is an interesting section that you can pause and read there that kind of gives you the specifics on what they require from that labor. But there you have it. Now, why I bring this up, like I said, this was enacted in 2011. Now, this goes hand in hand with something that was put together in 2005. 2005, I believe was the date. So obviously a few years before, and this is the Civilian Inmate Labor Program. Now I've talked about this on an earlier document. Let me go there. And here is that one. Now, it basically goes hand in hand because we have the 2011 executive order that was pushed and put together by Obama, obviously through the stroke of his pen. And because of that executive order, which allows for slave labor, it basically allows the government to implement this civilian inmate labor program that was put together in 2005. So because of the executive order, basically, I think these go hand in hand because the executive order initiates the plan behind the civilian inmate labor program. Hopefully, I'm stating that correctly, but let me just take you to a few imperative pages here. Here's the first critical one, and this is just kind of the summary of the document. This regulation provides guidance for establishing and managing civilian inmate labor programs on Army installations. It provides guidance on establishing prison camps on Army installations. It addresses record keeping and reporting incidents related to the civilian inmate labor program and/or prison camp administration. Okay, so again, that's just your summary, but it is very obvious. It is establishing a civilian inmate labor program. Now here on page 2, some critical information I just want to show you. Right here, it says civilian inmate labor programs benefit both the Army and correction systems by, and here's the number one way, providing a source of labor at no direct labor cost to Army installations to accomplish tasks that would not be possible otherwise due to the manning and funding constraints under which the Army operates. Very clearly, that is labor and work for free because it doesn't cost them anything to have us doing the labor. Obviously, that is slave labor. Now, this is not applying to prisons or anything like that. It's not applying to them. It is 100% applying to those in basically your FEMA camp scenarios. Let me show you one more or another section here. Now here we are on page 5, and let me just say something. Here is where it tells us under no circumstances will these types of inmates that are in these civilian labor programs will be allowed to do this program. Okay, and it's those who are principal to organized crime, convicted of a sex offense or history of conduct, convicted of a violent crime, or whose criminal history includes such conduct, an inmate convicted of sale or intent to distribute drugs, an escape risk, an inmate who poses a threat to the public, a person who has significant management problems in their current correction facility or in another facility. So these are, or it also says a person whom there is significant public interest in. So basically, all these types of people will not be allowed to take part in this forced labor camp of which you don't get paid to do. Okay, so therefore, these types of inmates aren't permitted, which tells me, again, this is not people in jail, folks. People in jail, all of them have committed a crime. Therefore, all of them would be out according to C. So who's left? Well, just your average patriots and veterans and Christians, those who they fear, those, or your political dissidents, those who don't agree with their agenda, which according to Operation Garden Plot are those that have been seen as violent tendencies. Your political dissidents, those extreme right-wing people, or left-wing extreme was also on there, but just extreme was left off, or political dissidents. These are the ones, which is why I wanted to bring in Operation Garden Plot that can be categorized here. So very obviously, this is not your jail inmates, folks. This is your people, your average, everyday citizens. Moving on to page 8 here, it says the Army, these prison camps will house minimum and low security inmates as determined by the correctional systems. However, the Army's primary purpose for allowing establishment of prison camps on Army installations is to use the resident nonviolent civilian inmate labor pool to work on the least portions of the installations. In other words, they can work on parts of the Army the Army residential area or the Army, the things that they need at the facility. That's a pretty clear quote. One last thing that I want to show you is here on page 26, which is the definition of a civilian inmate. Prisoners incarcerated in a federal, state, or local government penal facility. Prisoners of a military confinement facility are not civilian inmates. There's your distinguish there. Basically, if you're part of a federal, state, or local government, that's separate and different from your prisoners of a military confinement facility. 100% not talking about your jail and prisons. It's talking about a civilian domestic force here. Now, there's a lot of other points in here, but I've gone through this on occasion before. Lots of other interesting information you can see on this entire document. Now, that said, the reason that I wanted to show you all three is first we had Operation Garden Plot, which allows a federal takeover and also shows violent tendencies of political dissidents or your extreme right-wing terrorists and how we were already attacked on Operation Garden Plot years ago. And then we have our right-wing extremist document, which we know targets Christians, patriots, and the like. Moving on to Executive Order, now I'm blanking on the number, which is basically 13603, which is your National Defense Resource Preparedness. That is the heading for it. And basically, this gives President Obama the permission to take over all our resources. Not only that, but he can enact slave labor here in America, meaning that's you and I. And ultimately, this streams from the Civilian Inmate Labor Program, which is clearly for civilians and those domestic citizens that they round up and use for slave labor. Here we are back again to that. It's just an interesting tie, and I needed to get it out there. Anyhow, wanted to bring you the latest. This is Lisa Haven signing off.